everyone, Jim Branscombe here for the Cinematic Void vlog. Today we're doing another top 10 list, and the theme or topic of that list is going to be vampire films. So this is going to be my personal favorite vampire films, and I'm going to emphasize personal favorite because what I like in a vampire film is probably not the most traditional or conventional kind. So if you're expecting to see Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee on this list, sorry, they didn't make the cut. But, you know, that's fine. I don't think those movies are bad, but I guess what I want out of a vampire movie is really not a vampire film, I guess. You know, no castles or candles and, you know, vampires and capes. I don't think anyone has a cape in any of these movies. I mean, I could be wrong. There might be a cape somewhere, but it's not in that traditional sense. But anyway, this is my top 10 vampire film list. And like all the top 10 lists I do, it's one film per filmmaker, although that won't really be an issue for this list. So why don't we go ahead and sink our teeth into it. For number 10 on my vampire film list is a film directed by horror legend Tobe Hooper. And no, it's not the one you're thinking of. It is not Salem's Lot. I'm, of course, talking about 1985's Life Force.
Life Force. In the blink of an eye, the terror begins.
See, told you, not a traditional vampire list. It's only going to get weirder from here on out. The movie stars Steve Railsback, Matilda May, and a very young Patrick Stewart, who most of you probably know from Star Trek Next Generation, or maybe Green Room. I would like to think some of you just know him from Green Room, which would be really cool. The film was produced by the Cannon Film Group, who are best known for making gonzo and crazy action movies and movies about breakdancing. And for those of you who haven't seen Life Force, a race of space vampires have landed on Earth in London, and now they're looking to infect the human race and get all that energy and just deplete the planet and just, you know, do shit vampires do, except in that outer space way. The movie was co-written by Dan O'Bannon, who wrote and directed Return of the Living Dead, and also was one of the writers on the original Alien. For number 9 on my top 10 vampire list is a film called Vamp from 1986. For those who haven't seen it, basically there's these two frat dudes that are tasked with finding some strippers for their fraternity's like kind of party thing, and they end up in a club which happens to be run by vampires. And of course that leads to all kinds of vampire shenanigans. One of the coolest things about this movie is the head vampire is played by Grace Jones. Yes, Grace Jones, and she absolutely kills it in this movie. Another cool fact about the movie is that all the body paint on Grace Jones was actually designed by the famous artist Keith Haring. If you love 80s horror and you haven't checked out Vamp yet, do yourself a favor and add it to your spooky season queue. I think that you'll have a really great fun time with it. Number 8 on my top 10 vampire list is another very non-traditional vampire movie, but it comes from one of the best horror filmmakers working now. I'm talking about Guillermo del Toro, and it's the 1992 film Kronos. For those of you who haven't seen Kronos, 400 years ago, or at least at the time when the movie was made, this alchemist creates this device that grants whoever has it eternal life. And the shopkeep accidentally finds it, accidentally activates it, and hey, starts looking younger, looking healthier, that kind of stuff. Oh, and he also kind of has a taste for blood. Again, not really a traditional vampire movie, but it's a great film. Number 7 on my top 10 vampire film list is 1973's Ganja and H, directed by Bill Gunn. The film is quite a slow burn and very art house, but I think it's a rewarding watch if you're into that kind of stuff. For those of you who haven't seen the film, a lab assistant cuts himself on an ancient blade and gets infected by these germs, and well, you guessed it, now he craves blood. The film stars Dwayne Jones, best known for being the lead in Night of the Living Dead, and it's great to see him in something other than Night of the Living Dead, and kind of makes you wish that he was in more movies or had the opportunity to be in more movies, because he's a really, really great actor, and he shines in this movie just like he did in Night of the Living Dead. Again, if you like art house horror and slow burns, Ganja and H is definitely for you. The film was released under a couple different titles, including Blood Couple and Black Vampire, because at the time when it came out, distributors at the time just didn't know how to sell it, so they were just kind of pushing it as an exploitation film instead of the meditative art house horror that it is. For number 6 on my top 10 vampire film list comes a movie that may make you question, is this a vampire movie? Well, I'm talking about Messiah of Evil. Messiah of Evil is one of my all-time favorite movies, and yeah, I guess there's some debate if are there vampires or not, but they're definitely drinking some blood, so I think that counts. When I did my top 10 zombie film list, I had a few people mention in the comments that they would have included Messiah Evil in their list, and I think that's a fair point to say that it could be a zombie film. I just kind of feel like it's more of a vampire film. The film was directed by William Hoyk and Gloria Katz, who best known for being the screenwriters behind American Graffiti. They also did uncredited rewrites on a bunch of other George Lucas projects, including Star Wars, and probably most infamously, they were the writing directing team behind Howard the Duck, which I feel like they shouldn't get maligned for that. Howard the Duck's fun. It's better than most comic book movies. For those of you who haven't seen Messiah Evil, basically a young woman's going in search of her father, and she ends up at this weird seaside town where there's a cult of undead people that are just, looking for people to feed on and feast. There are two all-time great horror scenes in this movie. There's a scene in a Ralph's, and there's a scene in a movie theater. Coming in at number 5 on my top 10 vampire film list is, if you've been aching for some action in your vampire movies, well, here, I got a movie for you. It is 1987's Near Dark, directed by Kathryn Bigelow, stars Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen, and it's an all-timer. It's a great, 80s horror movie, a great 80s action movie, and a great 80s vampire movie. It's a pretty good trifecta there. For those who haven't seen Near Dark, there's just a small town boy. I feel like I'm about to kick into Don't Stop Believing by saying, just a small town boy. Anyway, maybe I should sing it. Just a small town boy gets bit by a vampire girl. All right, that's enough. Anyway, once this boy is bit, he's now roped into this group of nomad vampires that steal cars, travel town to town, and just basically murder and feast. Even though she's an Oscar winner for The Hurt Locker, I think director Kathryn Bigelow is still kind of underrated, even though she's made really incredible and great movies. She also did Strange Days and Point Break, and of course, Near Dark. Now, I know there's a lot of blood in vampire movies by the nature of, vampires drink blood. However, there's not a lot of gore and excessive violence. Well, my number 4 pick is going to rectify it. So I'm talking about 1993's Darkness, directed by Leif Jonker. Darkness is a really unique take on the vampire film because it's like shit you would see in a zombie film just applied to a vampire movie. It was shot on Super 8, it has a killer heavy metal, death metal soundtrack, and just the special effects are really incredible, especially when you realize it's just DIY, do-it-yourself, no budget filmmaking. For number 3 on my top 10 vampire film list, I guess by nature, vampires are sort of body horror, but what if the king of body horror, David Cronenberg, decided to take a stab at it? Like a literal stab. I'm of course talking about 1977's Rabid, directed by David Cronenberg, stars Marilyn Chambers, and basically it's about a woman that gets in a motorcycle accident and she has some kind of revolutionary experimental plastic surgery that saves her life. However, it makes her grow a appendage in her armpit, and through that appendage she stabs people and drinks their blood. And once that happens to that person, the side effects are they become a blood-crazed lunatic that goes after other people, infecting more people. Marilyn Chambers was obviously a very famous adult film star, and this is, I think, the only straight movie she did, and she's really good in it. And for those of you keeping track of such things, Rabbit's also a Christmas movie, so not only can you watch in spooky season, you can watch it during the holly jolly time of the year. Sort of speaking about Christmas, but not really, my number 2 pick for top 10 vampire films is by a director who directed probably the best Christmas horror movie ever made, Black Christmas. He also probably directed the most seen Christmas movie ever made, which is A Christmas Story. I am talking about Bob Clark, but it's neither of those movies. The movie I'm talking about is Death Dream. Death Dream was also released as Dead at Night, and it's kind of a flip on the old monkey paw tale where basically this guy, Andy, played by Richard Backus, dies in Vietnam, but his mom makes a wish for him to come back alive. And he does, except now he doesn't want to hang out with anyone, and he only wants to go out at night, and he only wants to kind of drink blood. This is a really, really cool movie. It's a great 70s exploitation horror movie. It was shot in Florida, and also of note, besides being directed by Bob Clark, this is the first movie that special effects artist Tom Savini did effects for. And for my number 1 pick on my top 10 vampire film list is a movie directed by George A. Romero. And yes, I know he's traditionally the zombie guy, but he also happened to make my favorite all-time vampire movie, which is 1977's Martin.
My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old. People think I'm crazy when I tell them how old I am. I'd like to be normal. I just have a sickness.
Martin, another kind of terror.
The film stars John Amplas, who plays maybe a vampire, maybe not, but he's basically going to live with his elderly cousin, trying to kick the habit of just drugging women, slitting their wrists, drinking their blood and then staging it like it's a suicide. This is a really interesting movie just because, you know, is he really a vampire or is he just a crazy serial killer? And the movie doesn't really answer that question, which is why I love it so much. Again, Tom Savini did special effects. This was the first time he did special effects for George A. Romero. Martin was kind of the beginning of George Romero's renaissance in his career. Obviously, he had Night of the Living Dead, but like in those years between Night and Martin, he kind of struggled. He made some really interesting movies like Season of the Witch and The Crazies, but they just kind of fell and got lost in the shuffle. So with Martin, it kind of just opened the door, and you know, got to do Dawn of the Dead after that, which basically made his career explode and led him to do bigger things over the next several years. So that's going to wrap up my top 10 vampire film list. Again, a very non-traditional one, but that's okay. This is just my list. You can tell me what your list is. Sound off in the comments, hit me up on social media, and until next time, see you in the void, and let's get ready for spooky season.